been driving along the highway that night, you'd have thought they were shooting a movie. Traffic suddenly crawled, and you see on the grassy median inside a barricade of flashing lights, fire truck, ambulance, state trooper, a blue '93 Volvo with its trunk crushed into the back seat. A tall teenage boy is playing the bagpipes. 3 firemen surrounding him, grinning as they train their walkie-talkies on him so the guys back at the firehouse could hear him. The man standing off to the side watching all of this, trying to take it all in, was me, his dad. I didn't know it yet, but I'd suffered a traumatic brain injury. That night was 5.5 years ago. I don't have any book learning in neuroscience or medicine, but I've gained an excruciating amount of field experience. Neurologists should know that while many survivors' symptoms overlap, our injuries can also diverge. Mine makes it hard to organize and sort physical things as well as ideas and information. Without a script, I start stammering and shut down. If neurotrauma rehab were well understood among neurologists, if it were at all predictable the way, say, recovering from knee surgery is predictable, our treatment would be different and our recovery faster and more complete. For me, over the next week, each day the symptoms got worse and new symptoms appeared, which is fairly typical for TBI. Besides the aches and pains from the jolt, I felt like I had the flu and deeply grieving. I also slept a lot.
I felt terrible, like I was moving in slow motion.
I burst into tears. A CAT scan showed no bleeding, but I failed miserably an informal neurotest involving balance and counting backwards by sevens. A neurologist mentioned contre coup, when the brain is smashed up against the hard, ridged interior of the skull. He said, go home and spend the next 3 weeks doing nothing, no mental or physical exertion of any kind. So I sat out in the backyard looking at the trees slowly change color. I saw distant airplanes leaving white streams that faded into the blue sky. I thought, that's what my memory is like. I developed a tan and people said, hey, you look great, which is the biggest disconnect of this injury. After 2 weeks of doing nothing, I wasn't getting any better. In fact, I seemed to be getting worse. I had an MRI and an EEG, and the results were fine, which is also pretty typical for a so-called mild TBI. But the neurologist noted my lack of progress. He called it regress. He told me I could either do nothing and let nature take its course, or see a neurotrauma case manager, which is what I did. So, what should you do in the first month after a brain injury? As little as possible. Keep the visual and auditory stimulation to a minimum. You've got to rest your brain.
At this point, you may need to stop and catch your breath, and that's okay.
It occurred to me that every time we open our eyes or even hear something, we are processing information, even just staring at trees. Our brains receive the world as information.
His mind is like a clean, hungry sponge.
With my eyes open and my eardrums tender, the world flooded my brain. And my brain worked hard to process it, sometimes shutting down completely. The way a lawnmower shuts down when you run over a patch of really long grass.
Would you like to get inside my brain?
Using metaphors helps. Because the injury is invisible and I look great, I say it's like my brain is in traction. Cognitive strain is like the microwave and toaster on at the same time, at least in our house. Memory is like Velcro because brain injuries can make our memories slippery with no little hooks for them to latch onto. Survivors of any brain disorder have to find a way to adapt and overcome their limitations. I think that's the difference between recovery and rehab. Recovery means returning to your old life. Rehab is adjusting to a new life. Brain injuries are the most frequent reason for visits to physicians and ERs. The more you talk to survivors, it's astonishing to discover how few MDs, even neurologists, recognize symptoms of TBI and diagnose it as such.
Ow! Quit it.
Especially because MRIs and CAT scans are inadequate to show the stretching and tearing of neurons.
You were supposed to understand.
Out of frustration, I said to one doctor, you seem to be used to working with more severe cases of TBI, and so when someone like me comes into your office, you might be thinking, what's he worried about? At least he's walking around. Well, the truth is that I and many people I've been meeting with TBI are the walking wounded. I'm finding that the most up-to-date knowledge about TBI isn't trickling down to or bubbling up to neurologists, even at major hospitals.
Help me.
Holy smokes! You need booze!
David, a survivor friend of mine, told me, nobody, not one of my doctors, ever asked me, where were you hit? How hard were you hit? He asked a researcher in mild TBI for a major medical journal. Does it matter which quadrant of the brain takes a blow? Are the brain's chemical releases harmful or helpful? For 3 weeks, David asked him more questions, but he kept hearing, well, we don't know. This researcher turned out to be a doctor at one of the country's leading research hospitals. David persisted, but finally the doctor said, David, we just don't have answers to these questions. We don't know. Look, TBIs are more common than heart attacks. This lists those who have been actually diagnosed in the U.S. with a TBI annually. Let's put our brains together and support brain research. Visit www.neurofilmfestival.com.